So it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to our Psi Upsilon program during Sigma Volunteer Week, focusing on and celebrating volunteerism. This evening, we have a special panel highlighting our service committee, Service and Philanthropy Committee for Psi Upsilon. And the moderator this evening will be Melody Parsons. Melody has been very active in Sigma, and she's the former chair of our Service and Philanthropy Committee. Before we get started, I would like to just share a few things. First of all, service and philanthropy is really a mantra of mine. And interestingly, when I was raising my family and stepped out of work full time, I think I spent more money on babysitting so I could do volunteer work. And it was interesting when I resumed my full-time career in academia. Um, I'm absolutely confident the reason why I was hired was because I remained very active as an advocate for the community. You know, at the time, I wasn't thinking of it that way. But giving of ourselves to others as nurses provides not only that wonderful feeling that we get for giving back, but we're also sharing our expertise and our compassion. And when you think about the tenets of Sigma, love, courage, and honor, those of us who serve, whether it's in the school or in the community or for a particular professional domain or vulnerable group, it requires love, courage, and honor. So I'm always excited to share the service opportunities that members of our Service and Philanthropy Committee are doing, and also to remind you that by volunteering for Sigma, for being involved in any organization, when you give back, you give of yourself, you give of your profession, and we are always, always supporting the future health of the global people in sometimes a small fashion and as a group in a large fashion. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Melody. Thank you so much, Melody, for coordinating and moderating this panel.
Thanks, Carol. So I know most of you, I think. I'm Melody Parsons. I'm a course instructor in the graduate nursing program at WGU. And I've been a nurse educator for about 16 years. And I joined Sigma as a nurse leader about 8 years ago when I was working in a brick and mortar institution. I joined with a different chapter. And a lot of the emphasis of our chapter there was service to the students. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, where we always did fun things for the students during finals week, or really went all out for the induction ceremonies. And so I enjoyed volunteering with that because I think, it's kind of like being a party planner or a caterer. You get to do some fun stuff outside of the role and just make a difference in the lives of your students. And so I was involved with Sigma there, and when I came to WGU, I knew that I wanted to transfer my membership and get involved in the Psi Upsilon chapter. And my involvement in this chapter has been quite different. I've had the opportunity to kind of go into a leadership role in the Service and Philanthropy Committee and really enjoyed that. So thank you for asking me to do this, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more from the members of our panel tonight. So let me tell you who we've got on the discussion panel. First of all, I'll let you know what we're going to do is we're going to just have a discussion about service from the perspective of a few different members of our committee. And sometimes people tend to think of the Service and Philanthropy Committee as the giving arm of Psi Upsilon, where they see the philanthropy piece a lot, but we don't necessarily connect with the service piece. After all, the philanthropy piece of our work is very visible. That's what we put in our press releases and our emails and our snack breaks. Look at what we gave to this foundation, or look at what your dues contributed to. But service really does go hand in hand because our most valuable resources tend to be found in our time and talents. So tonight we're going to talk about the service piece of our committee. Service to our communities, service to our academic organizations, service to the profession of nursing, and even service to self, and along with our service to Psi Upsilon and Sigma. So let me introduce our panel now. First, we have Dr. Kristen Lemmerbrock, and she's been a member of Sigma for 20 years, and she maintains involvement in more than one chapter, and she is very involved with Psi Upsilon. She joined the Service and Philanthropy Committee about 2 years ago, and she's recently taken over the chair position. Kristen has been with WGU for about 4.5 years, and she lives in Ohio. And also on our panel, we have Dr. Heidi Johnson Anderson. Heidi's been a nurse educator for 30 years, and she's been with WGU for about the past 8 years. Heidi was the first chair of the service committee when the Psi Upsilon chapter was launched. And she's been a mentor to me through the years as a nurse, as an educator, and she recruited me to serve on this committee and had helped me when I made the transition to the role of chair. As a former Service and Philanthropy Committee chair, she maintains an active involvement with the committee and the chapter, and she's my neighbor in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And then finally, we have Dr. Roberta Sumski. I hope I pronounce your last name right, Roberta. Um, she is an active member of the Psi Upsilon Service and Philanthropy Committee, and she's been a member of Sigma and as a nurse leader for about 2 years. Roberta lives in Indiana, just west of Indianapolis, where Sigma is headquartered. Roberta's been a nurse for 32 years, and she's taken on a leadership role recently in the affiliation between our Psi Upsilon chapter and the National Academy of Medicine, or NAM, collaborative to work on bringing awareness to and decreasing stigma associated with opioid use disorder. So I'm going to ask a few questions just in general of the panel, and then some more specific questions to each of our members about their service. So I'm going to start with Heidi. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with Sigma?
Uh, well, actually, I have not historically been extremely involved in Sigma until just about 3 years ago, um, because Carol was so involved and she said, "Oh, join us, it's awesome." And so I did, and it has been awesome. I've really enjoyed it. And I started out as the chair of the Service and Philanthropy Committee. And I've learned a great deal. I've had the opportunity to work with just wonderful, giving, kind souls who have so much on their plate, and they just keep raising their hand. Yes, I'll do it. I can do that. We can manage this. So that's just kind of how I got started with Sigma.
How about you, Roberta? How did you get involved with Sigma? And was Psi Upsilon your first chapter?
Great question. Yes, Melody. Hi, everybody. I'm Roberta Sumski. And Melody, I love you because I heard something today that said we have to think it to be it. And so I'm not Dr. Roberta Sumski, but I did just start my first class in my doctoral journey on Monday. So Melody's just thinking it for me. So a couple years.
I
I'll have
see
that
the
doctor
final.
name in front of me.
Sorry about that mishap, but good for you.
No, not at all. I just wanted to clarify that. So I actually was part of Sigma Theta Tau right out of nursing school, and really didn't get involved at all and let my membership lapse. And then when before I came to WGU, I worked at a large hospital institution and had spoken with several of my colleagues about, hey, let's look into Sigma Theta Tau. I think we could all do that. And we just never took the step to do it. So when I came to WGU, I had a colleague who actually I had worked with at that same hospital system, and she was at WGU. And so she sort of mentored me in my first year. And she really, some of you may know her, Cindy Davison. She's not here any longer. She is retired and living the good life. But she really spoke highly of the chapter Psi Upsilon here at WGU and really encouraged me to step in and get involved. And so it's thanks to Cindy that I'm here.
And Chris, I know you've been very involved with more than one chapter. How did you get started with Sigma?
I don't know that I would say I've been very involved with my first one. So when I was in nursing school for my BSN, it was kind of a status thing or an accomplishment because at my university, they were like only, a certain percent and, of individuals will be offered to join. And so just knowing my personality of that has to be one of my goals. And so the whole time during nursing school, that was like keeping the eye on the prize with Sigma, no doubt about it. And then when the letter came of the invitation, we all cheered at my house, and so it was pretty cool. And I don't know that I was so active in the first chapter, although I do keep a dual membership, probably more for, I don't know, sentiment. But when I was working on my DNP, and I think maybe I had just received it, and I reached out to Heidi because I knew she was part of the Psi Upsilon, and I had joined right away as well, and went to the induction ceremony, or when our chapter became in Utah. And I knew I had to join and be active because for me, just paying my dues financially just wasn't enough anymore. So it was actually Heidi that said, "Well, come on over here." I'm like, "Okay." So that was really awesome, and I feel very blessed to be in the position that I am now and get to work with so many awesome individuals. So
I love that you bring up the perspective of the student who is honored to join, because most of the people who actively serve our chapter are faculty. Um, but you're laying that foundation, and Roberta had that same foundation as a student. And you both come back around and said, okay, now I don't just want to be a member, I want to get involved. And we can have that same hope for our students. We have many, many members that join us, and as they graduate and move on and they've had that chance, they kind of fall away. But we've laid that foundation, and hopefully as we mentor them back into the role as nurse leaders and nurse educators, so many of the people that we work with, they can become involved again, and we can also encourage them to become more involved, to stay active rather than fall away once they graduate. And I know that Laura and her committee is doing a lot of things to help make that happen. So, Roberta, I'd like to talk a little bit about the NAM project that you've been involved in. And if you could give us a little bit of background about that, and tell us what piqued your interest in that work.
The NAM project, as Melody said, is a collaborative we have with the National Academy of Medicine, and we have committed to them that we would do education to decrease the stigma related to the opioid addiction. And really what piqued my interest in that work is I have grown up with a brother who has an addiction, not an opioid addiction, but an addiction. So I've lived that for a long part of my life, and I'm aware of that stigma from, people within our family, people outside of our family, and the things that my brother has had to deal with throughout his life. And thank goodness he is recovered and doing very well right now, but he had a hard life for many, many years. And so I really felt drawn to this work, that if I can make that simpler for anybody on this planet, I would love to do that so that nobody has to go through what my brother went through from a stigma perspective. And so the work we're doing, Megan Brown and I are leading it, and Cindy, Melody, I just forgot Cindy's last name. Who started it?
Thomas.
Thank you.
Cindy Thomas.
Cynthia Thomas. Yep. She
Mhm.
started this work, and it laid such a strong foundation for our chapter. And then Megan Brown and I have stepped in to take that over and really are looking at how can we get education out to decrease the stigma associated with the opioid addiction. And there's so much work out there that really speaks to, a lot of it is our language and the verbiage we use. Addiction is an illness. And so when we call somebody an addict, we are pointing fingers and not really thinking of that as an illness. So, a simple verbiage change of a person with a substance use disorder versus an addict can make such a huge difference. And so Megan and I have put together our initial presentation. I also should add, I have a friend that was we've been friends since our oldest boys were little guys, and my oldest is now 25, and unfortunately her oldest passed away from an addiction. He died of an overdose, and that really has also drawn me to this work, to really be able to make a difference, because she shared with me after his death that in the times that he relapsed, it was because he was lonely, and he was lonely because he would reach out to his friends and they didn't want to be associated with an addict. So really trying to bring his story forward to help show the impact and how these simple changes can help. So our first step was just to present the work for an initial reaction to the Psi Upsilon chapter, and then we'll be bringing it forward, presenting it to the larger, or the Service and Philanthropy Committee, pardon me. That was our first step, and then we'll be bringing forward, requesting if we can present that to the entire Psi Ups chapter, and our hope is then to spread it across the College of Health Professions. And eventually we'd like to also share it with the Teachers College, because we feel like the Teachers College also has a big impact to be able to change their verbiage as they're teaching children. We're seeing this younger and younger, and there's so much out there for our kids to get their hands on, and we really want to be able to make a broad impact.
That's great. Thank you. I want to point out that this work that Roberta and Megan are spearheading as part of our service and philanthropy committee goals for this year really align with our chapter goals, which involve focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals for international health and wellness. And this is where we've aligned that. So there's so many different things that fall under the umbrella of service. And this is a tremendous service that you are doing for our community and to the profession of nursing and Sigma members as we learn about that and start to affect change. So thank you. Heidi, can I ask you a little bit about, I know that you volunteered as a participant in a Sigma mentoring initiative that was piloted about a year ago. Can you tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that experience?
Yes, I can. So this was a mentoring initiative, and they were Sigma was doing this pilot to see how this would work. And Carol had actually gotten me involved in this, asked me if I would be interested, and I said, sure, why not? Let's try it. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Well, what it turned out to be was there was a number of pairs, and I want to say like there were 6 or 7 pairs of mentors and mentees. So my mentor was Naomi Titici, who was from Australia. And so we would meet on a regular basis, and she was mentoring me, which was so interesting because what happened was we ended up learning from each other. We really were mentoring each other to a certain degree, but she had just been mentored by Carol and now was mentoring me. And I I have to tell you, I just was so proud when I would tell people, "Well, I have to go to a meeting this evening. Oh, I'm just being mentored by another nurse from Australia." I mean, I felt so cool that I could say that. And if Naomi Titici is just an amazing person, and she works so hard, and she is just such a wonderful asset to this profession. I learned so much about professionalism and professional growth and how much work it takes to really continue to grow. The expectations for her at her university were tremendous, much more so than are expected of us at WGU. And it gave me a great appreciation for being in the United States, and we went through the beginning of COVID together. So we'd get together and we'd find out what's going on with COVID in your country. And
Yeah.
we're both worried about toilet paper. We had so many great laughs about toilet paper. And so even though this is a different type of volunteerism, what happens is that now I've been able to use some of those skills with others, with other colleagues, with students. I mean, with my children, I've learned wonderful things, and I'm a better person because of Naomi. So it was absolutely a fascinating experience, but mentoring is such an important part of volunteerism, whether it's some sort of official program or if we just accidentally serve as a mentor to each other or to students. But it was absolutely a fascinating experience, and I loved it.
Oh, that sounds like a great opportunity. And I
Yes.
love that you brought up the faculty role that is so common in academia, the expectation of service. And
Mhm.
I think that's a good segue to talk to Kristen about her next question, because um, if you don't know Kristen Lemmerbrock, you've been living under a rock. She is involved in everything. She is just one of those people that when there's something to do, she's one of those people that Heidi was talking about that always puts her hand up. I can do it. Yep, that's me. I can do it. And when she approached me about doing this talk tonight and moderating it, she said, you need to find some people who do a lot of service and talk to them. And I said, well, you're going to be on it. And she said, I don't do anything. And I started naming the things that she does, and she said, well, that's just part of my role. And in truth, at WGU, we don't necessarily have that tenure track pressure or the three-legged stool in academia of service, teaching, and scholarship that we have so clearly in those other areas. But she, as a nurse leader and as a nurse educator, takes that on just intrinsically. She says, "This is what I'm supposed to do," and I really appreciate that about her. And one of the things that Kristen is involved in is the Nln Committee at WGU. So can you tell us a little bit about your involvement and also why it's important to you to serve on different communities at the university?
Melody, you're so sweet. You're just so sweet. No, I love being on different committees, because not only the people, you get to, meet a whole bunch of different people and kind of the networking and all of that. But for me, it's really important to see things through different lenses, because I don't think that my perspective is always the right perspective. And it's always nice to grow, right? So professionally grow, but also I think internally, personally grow. I think through other people's thoughts and expressions and life, you know, just life, shared life experiences. And um, I have to say, Roberta and Megan, when they gave their um, talk to our Service and Philanthropy Committee, it was so moving, because I haven't had that experience, but I could definitely feel that when you talked about that. And I think it's really important to stay open um, to others, and I just think it's important to serve and again, maybe be uncomfortable, because Lord knows I'm uncomfortable a whole lot of times, because I think that I don't know that I'm okay for this role. I don't know if I can do this role. But I have to say, in the last year and a half, almost a year and a half, moving into this CI position, and Carol's direction, her guidance, I think it has given me the courage to spread my wings, even though it's not very comfortable sometimes, and step out of my shell. So that's important to me. And again, just to listen to other people. I think it's important. Um, and I don't know. That's why I like to serve on different committees and be in even different groups in the community. Whether it's your church group or your garden group or what have you. You just get to experience different people all the time, and I really do enjoy that. So
That's a great point. So speaking of other groups that you're involved in the community, Roberta, can you give me an example of any other service projects that you've been involved in?
Sure, I will share one that was really my absolute favorite. So I have four boys. My oldest is 25, my youngest is 16, and the oldest three were all marching band kiddos. So for about 10 years, we spent every weekend, almost year round, in the band room between marching band, jazz band, all the different bands. And in my first year, as we were getting into the high school and they were asking for volunteers, they said, "Hey, we need nurses to go to band camp." Oh, sure. I raised my hand. I'll go to band camp. And what I found was that there wasn't a whole lot of organization to it. A kiddo might come and say, "Hey, can I have some Tylenol?" And they might ask me, and I would give it to them. And they might ask another nurse, and that nurse would give it to them. And we kind of didn't have any real communication pattern down. And I also noticed that we needed more volunteers. So I said, "Hey, I would be happy to lead this. I would be happy to organize the volunteers. How can I help?" And so I started pulling volunteers together, and we very quickly realized that we needed to put some policies and procedures into place, not only to protect the nurses and their licensure, but also to make sure we were serving those kiddos the best that we could serve them. So that little, hey, I'll help, what can I do, led to 10 years of serving as the medical director, a volunteer position on the band booster board, and serving on their board for about 5 of those years. So it was at the time when board service became really something that as nurses we were encouraged to do to really grow our profession. So through that little act of volunteerism, I was able to do that and gain some experience and learn so much from that. And across those 10 years, met so many wonderful kids and so many great families. They sort of became our family. And we're done with that now because my youngest is a sports guy, not a band guy. But that truly was probably one of my favorite things that acts of service that I've done, and probably in my lifetime. It really was took a lot of time, took a lot of effort and energy, and as Kristen said, put me way outside of my comfort zone on many occasions, but really was such a great experience.
Oh, and look at how you were able to grow. If they would have come to you 10 years ago, Roberta, and said, "We'd like you to become the medical director for our camping program, and we'd like you to put a framework in place to protect our nurses' licenses and make sure that the camp attendees are getting all the medical care that they need," what would you have thought?
Yeah, I would have thought, no, I'm happy to be there to help as the nurse for the week of camp. I can't take that big thing on. And, like I said, I was able to, and it became more than just camp. So we had nurses at every practice. We had nurses at every competition, for marching band, for drumline, for winter drumline, for winter indoor winds competitions. And so, yeah, if they would have asked me to do that, I would have probably said, oh, I can't do that. I don't have the skills and abilities to do that. But it was so fun to be able to do that and to learn and grow through it.
And that's
And
how
yes,
service works.
Yes, can take you places you never thought of.
Yes. Ruth Ann has a story to share. And while we're on the topic, why don't you come off mute and share with us?
Sure, guys. Listening to the stories has reminded me of an interesting turn that my career took. Back in, and this may be belying my age a little bit, so sorry. Back in 2001, when 9/11 happened, I was still working for the hospital I still work for now. Some of you know I still work in the emergency department every Sunday, 7 p to 7 a. You can find me there taking care of patients. But on that day, on that evening when 9/11 happened, I was working at my hospital as the evening supervisor. And it's a small little tiny hospital in Pennsylvania, right on the outskirts of Philadelphia. And I was working 3 to 11 that night. I went into work and I walked into total pandemonium because not only what was happening in New York at the time, but my hospital system, we are 5 hospitals, my one hospital system, the biggest part of us, has the only burn center in the area. So they were, and this was before the time of any kind of emergency operations. We didn't have anything in place. We were making stuff up that whole night, but we were desperately trying to clear as many beds as we could so we could take patients from that main hospital that had the burn center, expecting, well, it's weird to say, hoping that we would get tons of patients because we were the closest burn center on the East Coast. So we spent at least I spent the whole day the whole evening trying to figure out who I could move from my intensive care units to take intensive care unit patients from that hospital, who I could discharge to take people that way. And needless to say, fielding phone calls from the media, and then these phone calls from people in the area who were volunteering their time, people who would call and say, listen, I'm a retired nurse. I don't know how I can help, but I can sit with a patient. I can transfer patients. I can get them home or to different places. I can ride in ambulances. Even these little old ladies and little old men who would call and say, I can sit with somebody, whatever. Anyway, after that shift, and sadly at around 9:30, 10 o'clock, when we finally figured out that we weren't getting any patients, which is, bad enough. But when I went home and I thought, look at that community. I mean, they didn't know what was happening. This was another state, hundreds of miles away, and it made me want to volunteer in my own committee, watching and being part of that. So I joined my local ambulance corps, who was all volunteers, I joined, eventually I became I got certified as an EMT, and I became their training officer. And then I decided to go back and get a master's. I have a doctorate now, but I decided to go back and get a master's. And I stepped down from my emergency position or my supervisory position and took the position in the emergency department. And from that, I kind of went into education, that training, that starting to train with EMTs and teaching police officers and other volunteers how to be an EMT kind of led into my becoming part of the EMT or EMS training system at the local community college. And that grew into, well, if you can teach EMTs, why don't you come over here and teach nurses? So that went into teaching nursing, and then teaching nursing went into my getting my master's degree, and then getting my master's degree led to a doctorate, and now here I am. I'm a doctorate in nursing. I'm in nursing education. Had you asked me that the day before that shift happened, it would have never been that way. But volunteerism, through that, wanting to be part of my community, I fell in love with emergency medicine. And because of my love of emergency medicine, I fell in love with teaching. And that's how my journey kind of went crazy. And I sat on the board for the Gloucester County Hero Scholarship Fund. And then sadly what happened was the volunteers kind of went away because the ambulance company kind of regionalized. And now I'm just a nurse.
Just a
But
nurse.
that was my
Very.
weird winding trip through volunteerism. So you never know where you're going to end up.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And what a great example. Always a nurse. That's right, Carol. And I was thinking as you were talking about how the nation responded and the nurses stepped up, and how this last year nurses have been at the forefront, and but it's not a day of response. It's been over a year of response, and there's a tremendous burden on nurses working at the bedside still. And there's so much that we can do to learn from their example, first of all, but also to say, okay, what can we do to serve them? And Heidi has, I think, been involved in some community work to kind of lead volunteer activities in the local region. And can you talk a little bit about some of those and what you've learned from those?
Yeah, so if a few years ago, and it's been a number of years now, I was instrumental in getting an ambulance service started in my small town. And which I have to tell you, what amazed me most was it's very challenging. The EMT exam is tough. I think it's harder than the nursing, than the NCLEX. I was a nervous wreck trying to pass the practical on that thing. But people in the community, like the mechanics and
Yep,
people who I wouldn't think would have any interest, they're busy trying to pass that EMT exam. It was amazing.
it
And
is.
and and when they look to nurses as leaders. So here's a kind of a funny story. So when COVID hit, okay, we started this mask up campaign in my community. And first of all, so here we have all these people trying to do Zoom. Well, that was hilarious. All these people trying to figure out how to do Zoom. That was, oh gosh, I laughed. But we had people calling me saying, okay, we could set up the garage, like these mechanics, we could set up the garage and we could we could put a hospital in here if we had to. I mean, they were willing to set up hospitals in these
Wow.
strange places. But and what was interesting to me and a bit of a challenge for me as a leader was all this creativity, and how do you handle all of these people with so much energy and just want to save the world, when I'm thinking that's never going to work. What you're thinking of is never going to work, but you just kind of have to roll with it. But it was really interesting to see a community just come together in so much love. It was just out of love for complete strangers that they came together. But one other experience I wanted to tell you about, I did a coat drive about a year ago. I mean, it wasn't even a year ago, but I did this coat drive and I learned a lot doing this coat drive, because I I was worried that people would bring just all their gross old coats. No, they're beautiful coats. I mean, everybody just brought these beautiful, beautiful coats. Well, now I have all these coats. Well, I'm trying to figure out where to take them exactly. So I took them to a women's shelter, and just to see if they would need any of them. And when I brought them in, the gal that was running it, she said, "Oh my gosh, these women never have coats when they get here." She said they leave in such a hurry, they never have coats. So if you're ever wondering what to do with your coats, you should take them to the women's shelter. And especially if you have size large. She said we have lots of smalls, but she said we never have coats big enough for everybody. She said we need larges. But isn't that interesting? She was
Yeah.
thrilled because she said these women never have coats when they show up. How sad.
And what an example of service of one individual can say, I'm going to do a coat drive. You don't have to have a committee. You don't have to have an organization backing you. You can just do that. And that's service in the same respect that being, the coordinator and starting an ambulance service is service. That takes a little bit more, but it's the mindset of this is what we do, and it's what we really want to promote as members of our committee and as chapter members of Sigma, that service to all these different factions. But thinking about the last year and the toll that the pandemic has had on everyone in the world, everyone has been impacted in some way. And I know that most of us are probably at some time feeling the strain of balancing work and life and family and service commitments. And with that, there's been a focus on self-care and wellness and renewal as well. And I'm not going to blindside you with this question. I gave you some time to think about it. But Chris, I'd like to hear your perspective on the term service to self. And I will say that I did not come up with that. That was part of the brainstorming effort for what we wanted to talk about in this effort, in this panel. And I kind of questioned at first, service to self. Well, what does that mean? But now you've had some time to think about it. What do you make of that term?
You know, I when I first heard it, I have to say, when I first heard it, I was really thinking more like taking care of yourself, self-care, because that's what initially came to mind. Um, but I think there's a bigger part of that. I did just a little bit of reading and just kind of searching, and really service to self, to me now, when I read that, it is truly being true to who you are, your beliefs, your core values. I think that is probably the bigger part, and really serving others does serve yourself, in that you kind of feel more fulfilled when you help others, as they're going through their life journeys, and um, and again, sharing stories with one another. I've had that opportunity a couple of different times in the past week, and shared life experiences, and the nurses on the front line definitely are exhausted, and how can we help as educators? And I think for me, speaking with students and just listening is so, I think, incredibly powerful for them. For me, I feel like that's not much, but it is so much for them when you get thank you so much for taking the time, and the very lovely emails of just thank you, like you just listened. So I think that, to me, is the more important part of that. And when I see service to self, it definitely has changed kind of my thoughts.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And you're right. It's not just about self-care. Ruth Ann said in the comments, it's in the ANA Code of Ethics. Nurses are to give the same care to themselves as well as their patients, and that's true. We have to care for ourselves in order. It's kind of, the old oxygen mask on yourself before on others, but it's more than just a day at the spa or taking time for a hot cup of tea. It's prioritizing your own education, your own wellness, your own time, so that you can make that time for others as well. So we're recording this presentation, and most of the people who are here tonight are WGU faculty, active members of our Psi Upsilon organization. But this recording is going to be available to all our membership. And I would see that it could be possible that a new member might click on and say, oh, this is a new one, I'll watch it. Something I want to get involved. So I want to ask you, if you were talking to someone who's just getting started as a member of Psi Upsilon, what would you say to them about getting involved? And I'll ask Roberta that question.
I think I would say it's so easy. So having been a nurse for 32 years, it's so easy to join different associations and pay our dues and, maybe read the journals that come with it and really not utilize that organization and utilize our skills and talents and abilities and kind of that focus on service to self, serve self to serve others, really not capitalize on that, just staying in the background. And so for me, I didn't want our Psi Upsilon chapter to be that for me. So I wanted it to be, if I was going to pay the dues, I wanted to be a contributing member and actively involved. And I think I have learned and grown so much just from being involved over the last 2 years and met so many of you wonderful ladies and gentlemen to really help enhance my own professional development and just learn things. I think, earlier we said volunteerism takes you to places that you never thought it would, but sometimes connections with others and putting yourself out there and getting involved really does take you to places you've never learned and really helps you to grow and develop as an individual. So it took me a lot of years in my nursing career, and I won't say that every association I belonged to, I did nothing but pay the dues, because I was involved in some other ones along the way as well. But so many times it's easy to just pay the dues and go, yeah, well, I'm a member, but not really be an active contributing member. And I think we cheat ourselves when we do that.
Yes, and we're thankful that you're members and that you pay your dues, because your dues do allow us to give and to do service projects, and that's important too. But getting involved is really key to growing within the organization. And I think several people tonight have given examples of how they didn't feel ready or didn't feel qualified, but they just started helping. And that helping mentality and then being mentored by others as you grow into it is how you get into those positions where you're really affecting change, and you can continue to serve your community, the profession, and Sigma. So that's the end of my questions for our panel tonight, but I'd like to give you all the opportunity to ask questions for anybody who's here tonight, or share your stories, anything you'd like to share. And you can come off mute and talk with us, or you can type your questions in the chat. Either way is okay.
I'm interested to know if anybody has a story about getting involved in something that they did not see as volunteer work, and then after they were in it a while, they figured out, wow, that was volunteering. Does anyone have an example of that?
Sandy, it's Carol, if I may. I think that very often our volunteer work kind of mirrors our professional and personal lives. And often, as Roberta mentioned with the bands, for those of us that have children, you start doing things with your children's school or their activities. And I don't think we often see ourselves as volunteers. And the connections we make and the often will lead to other interesting activities that we still don't see as volunteer work, whether it's a political appointment or an opportunity to give back to the community. I don't think I've ever really thought of my, all joking aside, you know, somebody said to me, like, you're the consummate Kendall County volunteer, but I never really saw it like that. I just saw that I was driven and passionate about doing and giving and being involved. And what struck me is, you know, and I think, Roberta, you mentioned this, and several of you, is like when you move into leadership roles of volunteers, you realize that volunteers won't be involved if you don't enjoy their passion for what they want to do, bring joy to the experience, and know that you're giving them as much as they're giving you. There's got to be this wonderful give and take, and but in a healthy way. That's just been my experience over the years.
That's what I think too. You know, I think that things go on in our neighborhoods, whether or not it's about nursing, and just opening our eyes and paying attention and participating, or even watching and listening, is a way to volunteer. And I think that sometimes when people are hesitant to put their energy towards something, it should, you know, it should be called some other thing other than volunteering. we're looking for volunteers for blah blah blah. There should be some other word that makes it sound different, because it's definitely a way of self-care. Because, you know, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, boy, that was a bad experience, and I'm really sorry that I gave my time over there. You know, what they say is what you said, is that there was camaraderie and there was enjoyment and there was interaction with other people, etc.
It's
And
like
you know, Sandy, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that authentic presence, you know, for whatever that authenticity is in that moment, and the presence in the moment.
Right.
And I think some of the time, the reason that people are hesitant to volunteer is because they think, well, once I get started with something, I'm never going to be able to quit. And I've got too much on my plate, and I'm going to have to keep doing it forever. And I think it was great what Roberta pointed out, that she had been involved with the band camp nursing leadership for 10 years. And now she's had to step back from that because she's got another child with different interests. And it's okay to quit and to step away from certain activities. We need to move on. We need to find, you know, things that connect with what we're currently passionate about, or that connect with what our current life goals are, that really fit well, or maybe it's time to give somebody else an opportunity to step in and serve there. So I think that's something that we all need to allow ourselves permission to do. And I think, Laura, you had a question or a comment.
Oh, yes. I was just going to comment to Sandy that I agree that most of our volunteer activities naturally flow from what we're interested in. And I have just a real brief example that through both a work colleague where I worked before and my church, there was an opportunity to volunteer for a program that provides education for new mothers. Primarily, they were, you know, women that were younger, first child, you know, had some needs. And so I did not have the time to volunteer as a mentor, but I did want to volunteer with some coordination. And then what kind of evolved from that was they needed to update a curriculum that was getting a little old. So I ended up with my clinical background of maternal newborn nursing and being a nurse educator. I got involved in some months of revising the curriculum that was taught to these moms. I absolutely loved every minute of it and was so glad to be able to give back, and was very much appreciated. But for me, it was just absolutely a joy. So again, I think it did evolve naturally from what I was interested in, where I was involved. And then that has launched some other wonderful relationships through that program and through some, you know, other relationships that have come. So I do think that when we're open, whether it's in our nursing practice or in our community, and it's just so interesting how all of my interest and my background kind of merged into this one role to be able to help this organization. So I'm just going to share that.
That's a great example. Thank you. And what a good program to be involved in.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions or comments or stories you'd like to share? And I'll give you a couple of minutes before I cut you off. But I do want to say that if you're listening to this in a recording, or for those of you who are here live, I'd like to challenge us all to think about how we can go beyond membership and think about service in the next year. And one way that you can do or highlight that service, I just want to put in a little plug. If you're a member of Sigma, we do have the Service Involvement Badge program, and there's more about that on the homepage of our Circle website. And it's just a kind of a self-tracking tool that you can keep track of the service that you do, and especially service to our Psi Upsilon chapter, and you can earn a membership badge or a service badge. So it's something that you can use on your CV or your professional development plan. That's more than just saying, I'm a dues paying member of Psi Upsilon, but I'm involved, and this is how I can prove it. So that's something that you might want to think about making one of your goals in the next coming year if you're looking to increase your service. And I'm going to turn it over to Carol to say a few words in closing, and I think she has a surprise announcement.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melody Parsons. You have done a marvelous job in leading this panel, and this is something that I'm so passionate about. And I have to tell you, it was hard for me not to want to jump in and just keep telling all these stories, but you mentioned a few things that I think are worth highlighting. One is that it is okay to pass the baton in service. You know, we get so involved that, I don't know, have you ever worked in an organization where somebody was so committed, they were there for years and years, and after a while, there was a drain because they weren't receptive to new ideas and creativity. So much like we do in the workplace, we've got to build the next generation of service providers, because they also need to be oriented and build confidence and say, you can do this, and we need you, we need new ideas. So always know that if you're doing something, always look for that next person that you can hand that opportunity to. I was saying at our last Psi Upsilon board meeting that June 30, I'll be ending my term as president of Psi Upsilon. And I extended the term because we were a brand new chapter and so much was going on at WGU. But for the first time in almost 20 years, I will not be a president-elect or a president of a Sigma chapter. And it's kind of an emotional experience, but there's this wonderful feeling when I was listening to all of your stories, and I thought to myself, we are in really good hands. We have a chapter almost 2,000 strong, and I know we don't get a tremendous amount of people attending live, but we have almost 2,000 members in every state in the nation. Think about the impact that this chapter has and can continue to have as we start to engage more and more of our members. And as Melody mentioned, the students and the people in clinical, they don't need to be WGU staff or employees. And let's look for ways to really encourage them to get involved. There's no perfect way to serve. There's no perfect volunteer. And in fact, sometimes the best volunteers are those of us that make big mistakes, because we're taking risks and we're having fun. And we're really living authentically who we are as nurses, who we are as women, who we are as professionals. And we're doing the best we can. And we're living the tenets of Sigma: love, honor, and courage. And it takes love, it takes honor, and it takes courage to do what we do, especially during this unprecedented year. So when we talk about giving time and talent and tincture, when we talk about giving also philanthropically, you know, I've been a huge supporter of the Sigma Foundation, but I'm just so excited to announce that because of the members that we have, and as we pointed out, not all members are going to be active at any given time. It really has to suit and fit where they are in their lives. But because of the membership we have, our chapter has been able to build a strong financial base. And we gave $10,000 to WGU for their first annual Giving Day, targeted for WGU College of Health scholarships. So when you think about what we're giving and the foundation that we're laying and how many students that's going to benefit, it's really, really very exciting. It was quite humbling for me to be talking to the advancement office, and they were so appreciative, and they just kept saying thank you over and over again. So please spread the word to your colleagues and other members that you speak to that it's because of them. 28 cents a day has allowed us to just start with this wonderful donation. We contribute to the Sigma Foundation. We offer scholarships and grants, and we also have 4 WGU nursing scholarships a year. So in addition to our time and these wonderful experiences, our chapter's trying to give in ways that maybe other chapters can't. So please remember that. And you're absolutely right that sometimes being a member is just being present and continuing that membership and knowing that maybe in a few years, you'll be president of this chapter or you'll be on the international board, because I can tell you 15 years ago, I would have never thought that that opportunity would have been available to me. And it's humbling and it's exciting, but it's only because we support all the nurses to make a difference for global health care. So thank you so very much for sharing your stories. Continue to share your stories. Put them on the circle, type them in so people will read them over and over again, because it's these stories that inspire others, that drive others, and frankly, that motivates everybody to be the best nurse and the best person that we can be to others. So I would just say thank you so very much for being here, and know that I appreciate absolutely every one of you for what you do and for who you are. Thank you so much for being here. And again, Melody and Kristen and Heidi and Roberta, thank you for sharing your stories. Ruth Ann and Laura and Sandy, every one of you, we really appreciate what you've shared today. It's been very meaningful. Thank you so very much. And thank you for joining us this evening.